Morehead City is just like any of the thousands of coastal communities in America. If you're on the waterfront, you'll see a few familiar things, like a row of fishermen casting out a line, or families stepping into a seafood spot after a day at the beach nearby. But if you look a little closer across the narrow Bogue Sound, you'll spot something unusual hanging out in the water.
They are really big and really tall, and it's something that we haven't used before.
A multi-million-dollar project is underway to save Morehead City's last line of defense, Sugarloaf Island. The barrier island sits right across from the city center in eastern North Carolina. It protects the town from the pounding waves of the Atlantic Ocean.
Thing that we got on the waterfront is Sugarloaf Island. If Sugarloaf goes away, we won't have the Morehead City waterfront.
I'm Anissa Khalifa. This is The Broadside, where we tell stories from our home in North Carolina at the crossroads of the South. This week, what does it take to save an island? And can science really stem the tide of an ocean?
Hi, I'm Celeste. Gracia. I'm the environment reporter at WUNC.
So Celeste, tell me about Morehead City and its relationship to Sugarloaf Island.
Yeah, it's a small fishing town out on the coast. I think the population is just under 10,000. And Sugarloaf Island is a small barrier island right outside of the downtown waterfront district. This is an exaggeration, but it's so close, like you can touch it. In reality, it's, I think, 0.1 miles away from the waterfront.
Okay.
The island is really important because it serves kind of like a last line of defense. So it protects Morehead City from storm surges. It protects Morehead City from any boat waves or hurricane winds, hurricane storms.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The other reason why Sugarloaf is so important is because it's also very sentimental to people in Morehead City.
We need to protect that island.
Do you ever go out to Sugarloaf now?
Always. I was there yesterday.
Last month, I went out to Morehead City and I met the mayor, Jerry Jones.
Been mayor since 1999.
He was born and raised there, and he told me about some of his adventures going out to Sugarloaf when he was growing up.
And I'd go down to the local tire shop and I'd get an old inner tube and they'd patch it up for me and I'd blow it up. And I'd go out in Bogue Sound and we'd float and play along the Bogue Sound and drift with the falling tide. And then we'd get off on Sugarloaf Island and play there all day. And when the tide shifted to come in, we'd get back on the inner tubes and go back to my grandmother's house.
He also told me that he's worried about the island. Over his life, he's been watching it disappear.
If Sugarloaf goes away, we won't have the Morehead City waterfront because with no protective breakwater there, no island, all these boat wakes, all the hurricane winds, all the southwest winds would just batter our Morehead City waterfront.
How much of Sugarloaf Island has actually disappeared, and what will happen if it does get washed away?
I talked to Lexia Weaver about that. She is with the North Carolina Coastal Federation.
The island has lost a football field, like several blocks of shoreline over the years.
I mean, a football field worth of erosion. And this erosion that she's talking about is natural, caused by hurricane storms or boat waves, but that's still a lot. When I was talking to Lexia, she also really emphasized how significant Sugarloaf is to the economy of Morehead City.
They've had this very significant amount of erosion. So what are they doing about it?
So there's a multi-million-dollar restoration project going on, $6.6 million to be exact, coming from the General Assembly. There's two main components to it. The first part is oysters. They are building oyster reefs on Sugarloaf with these devices called oyster catcher reefs. Basically, they're artificial reefs.
I was not expecting oysters to be part of the answer here. That was very unexpected.
I agree. When I was talking to Lexia, I learned a lot of fun oyster facts. For example, oysters are really good at filtering water. One oyster can filter 30 gallons of water a day.
Wow.
And they also provide great habitat for fish. For the specific purpose of restoring Sugarloaf and focusing on erosion, Alexia says that oysters help prevent erosion by acting kind of like a speed bump.
So when the oysters grow on top of each other, so you'll have an oyster that grows and then another oyster will grow on top and then another oyster will grow on top, and eventually that reef will gain elevation or height.
My understanding is they are not being placed directly in the water, but more so along the shores of Sugarloaf.
So waves come in and then that wave energy is attenuated or dispersed, and so it slows it down, and then that's how it prevents erosion.
The second part are these things called WADs. And that stands for Wave Attenuation Devices. This is the first time that WADs are being used here in North Carolina. They've been used before in other places, specifically in Florida, but it's new, that's never been used before, in coastal waters in North Carolina. They are really big and really tall, 7 feet tall, pyramid-shaped. Each WAD weighs 7,500 pounds. It's made out of concrete. And each triangular side has 6 smaller triangles that are open holes. The idea is for fish to be able to swim through them.
So it's like a giant pyramid that has triangular holes all through it?
Yes.
So what do they do exactly?
So here's how they work. They are lined up near the shore, just off the shore of Sugarloaf, and as the waves come in, they disrupt the waves' momentum. They pretty much neutralize the waves' energy, thus the name wave attenuation, right? They are attenuating the waves. And once the waves hit these devices, the sand that's carried by the waves then falls behind the WADs and starts to make a sandbar there. The idea is that this will eventually build back up the coastline of the island to its original boundaries. So essentially, the WADs are collecting the sand in order to rebuild the land.
So you actually saw these WADs, these wave attenuation devices being built. What did that look like?
The WADs are being built by this Florida-based company called Sea and Shoreline. Tina Harris is a pre-construction manager for the company.
So these units at 3 days, because I just got testing from Friday, they're around 4,000 PSI.
Tina was kind enough to take me out to the construction site, and it was a very well-oiled process. So they pour the concrete into the mold, vacuum out any excess, kind of smooth out the top, and then they move on to the next. They let the concrete dry, and then once those WADs are done and ready to be put in the water, that's when they go to the barge.
It takes about a day and a half to cycle the barges with tides and weather conditions.
And so after doing all this research on the WADs and hearing about everything that they do, I wanted to go out to Sugarloaf and see them in action for myself.
Coming up, Celeste takes us on a boat trip to see what these WADs are all about and if they have what it takes to save Sugarloaf Island.
I'm Anita Rao, host of the weekly podcast Embodied. It's a show that no matter the topic dives into unexpected territory, like what it's like to first get an autism diagnosis as an adult, or how BDSM communities may change the way you think about kink. You'll meet folks who aren't afraid to question what we think we know about intimacy, and who have some fascinating stories to share about their relationships. Listen to Embodied and let's take on the taboo together.
Hey, this is Jared Walker. I'm an editor here at WUNC North Carolina Public Radio. Each week, I work with Anissa, Charlie, and the rest of the team here at the Broadside to bring you stories from this fascinating place we call home. But we can only do that with your support. So if you've enjoyed the reporting and original stories you've heard in the podcast, please donate by clicking the link in this week's episode description, or go to WUNC.org and click the donate button at the upper right-hand corner of the page. Thank you so much. Okay, now let's get back to the show.
So you went out to the island to see these WADs for yourself. Tell me about the day when you went out onto the water. What was it like? What was the weather like? How are you feeling?
I was really excited. I'm always happy when I get to go out on a boat. I went out on a Monday afternoon. I was originally scheduled to go out on Tuesday morning, But that Tuesday, there was a bad storm that was supposed to come in, which really just goes to show how weather dependent this project is. Folks out there putting the wads in the water are very much at the mercy of the wind and water and any storms that might be rolling through.
Do you think we can get the barge pushed off so Joey can get
It was a really, really windy day. The boat kept rocking back and forth.
Got it? Hold on to me.
It was a relatively small boat. It was me and Tina, my photographer, and the man driving the boat. But it was really exciting to see the wads for myself.
Well, you can see the difference in the water on the outside and the inside. I like how much smoother it is.
The water behind the wads, it's very calm. It's very smooth. It's very tranquil compared to the rough waters where we are riding in our boat. But behind the wads, it's very smooth, it's very calm.
Oh, look, a duck has already made its little home there. The birds.
There's a few seagulls who had already made their homes on top of the wads. You know, they're so closely put together, I almost feel like I could jump around them. Jump from one to one.
So that's one of our employees out there, and they have to jump from each one.
So then we made our way around the island and went to the barge, which is like a floating deck, where they are actively putting the wads in the water. Crew members will go to the wads and tie chains around the hooks, and the crane will pick it up and put it right into its proper place.
So you mentioned that they're very specific locations that these wads need to be placed in.
Yeah.
How exactly are they placing them in relation to the island?
I think a good way to think about it is to imagine a dotted line. Lexia says where the wads are being placed has been meticulously planned out, and this dotted line actually outlines the original shoreline of Sugarloaf before it was eroded away.
Yeah, and we wanted to go further. Permitting agencies didn't allow us. We wanted to go to like what it was in the 60s, or I forget what year it was. But yeah, so we're not going as far as we would have liked to go.
And so as the island is being built up again, then it will follow that dotted line outline.
So they're carefully placing these wads along a dotted line where they want the island to eventually be. Where are they in that installation process?
Tina says that they are more than halfway done with installing the wads, and at the very end, in total, it'll be about 11 to 1,200 wads that will be placed around different sections of the island. And Tina told me they're already starting to see some results.
Within a month or two, there's visible growth. You can see where they're starting to adhere.
What Tina's describing is the culmination of all the different restoration project components coming together. There's the oyster catcher reefs that are building oyster habitat. The wads are also helping to build oyster habitat.
It does not take much time for the oysters to start to attach and that habitat to start to develop.
The wads are also helping to rebuild sand, and eventually that will help build back the land on Sugarloaf that's been lost. So there's a lot of different moving parts that are all working together in unison, and that is what makes this restoration project so unique.
How do these wads compare to other methods for curbing the impact of tides and ocean currents? You know, we've seen communities use things like beach nourishment, seawalls to try to protect their shorelines before. How are wads different?
Lexia with the North Carolina Coastal Federation says breaking up the current with these wads has a very different effect compared to something like a seawall.
These seawalls, they block the wave energy completely, right? But that wave energy comes back with it. So it's like hitting a wall. That wave energy comes back with it. And then over time, it scours or it removes all of the salt marsh habitat that was in front of it.
So like Lexia is saying, a seawall has the potential to wipe away the natural habitat that is already there. Wads are actually going to help create habitat for oysters and for fish. And to that point, the plan is to keep these wads in place around Sugarloaf forever.
Forever. How is that going to look? Like, are you going to still be able to see these triangles pointing out of the water? How is that going to look once the ecosystem has settled in around these wads and these oyster habitats?
My understanding is yes, that there will always be a little piece of the wad sticking out from above the water. And when oysters start to latch on and create their own habitat, then maybe it'll look more like oysters sticking out of the water instead of just concrete. But these wads will become a part of the natural ecosystem, and removing them would actually cause disruptions.
Will they have to do this again in the future? Is this a long-term fix or a short-term fix for the erosion of Sugarloaf?
Well, everyone involved in the project hopes it will be long term, but really only time will tell. Lexia says they plan in about 50-year increments, 50. So she's hopeful the WADs can do their job to restore Sugarloaf within that time span.
Over time, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of years, they may be underwater, but at least we are, buying, I would say, at least 50 years of time for that downtown waterfront to be protected. And if we do nothing, that island is going to go away.
Wow, 50 years. Do you think that Sugarloaf is a case study for other parts of the Carolina coast? Can these WADs really do it all? Can they be a possible fix for erosion along the entire shoreline?
Yes and no. I think WADs are a new, innovative tool for North Carolina, and Lexia and Tina even hinted that there might be future projects coming down the pipeline where WADs are used again along the North Carolina coast. But WADs have a limited capacity for use. Permitting is always a hurdle, and they are not designed to be ocean-facing.
It's more like inland waters, estuaries, coastal rivers.
So, for example, we cannot put WADs all along the Outer Banks. They are designed specifically for more intercoastal waterways. And Sugarloaf is located in the intracoastal waterway. So that's a good example of where it can work. It could not work for all of the North Carolina shoreline.
So it can't really handle the full brunt of the Atlantic Ocean.
Correct.
So, Celeste, after reporting this story, what are your main takeaways? Can we really control the ocean's current and help bring back some of these eroded islands?
Again, my answer is yes and no. I think we as humans cannot control the current, but we are learning how to better work with it, especially given rising sea levels. One thing that stood out to me about this restoration project is how quickly we're seeing results. I think Sugarloaf is a really wonderful example of what's possible. As an environment reporter traveling around the state and reporting lots of different kinds of stories, I am familiar with a lot of doom and gloom. It can sometimes be really disheartening and it can be scary. But when I do a story like this, something that's new and innovative and exciting, I have hope. It gives me hope. And I have hope for the future. I have hope that we're going to figure it out. It's exciting to see something like WADs being used for the first time because it can have larger implications for other parts of the coast. Maybe not the Outer Banks, but other places. And with rising sea levels that are going to continue rising, we're going to need all the innovation we can get.
If you'd like to see photos and hear more of Celeste's reporting on Sugarloaf Island, check out this week's show notes. Charlie Shelton Ormond is our producer. Our editor is Jared Walker. Our executive producer is Wilson Sayre. The Broadside is a production of WUNC North Carolina Public Radio. You can email us at broadside@wunc.org. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating, a review, or share it with a friend. I'm Anissa Khalifa. Thanks for listening, y'all. We'll be back next week.